Hey, I'm Jenny Hale. We've been talking a lot about trauma lately, and it's pretty apparent most people are aware now of big T trauma, PTSD, wars, victims of crime, stuff like that. And not so many people are aware of the small t trauma, the more subtle versions of trauma, things that may have happened before you remember when you were a child, uh, that left you with some painful childhood emotions that are unresolved and you've suppressed them somewhere. And what happens is, as you go about your life day to day, something will come up that resonates, reminds, associates with your childhood experience. And then the childhood emotion will try to come to the surface. And at that point, you need to make a response to keep that childhood emotion down. And the four main responses, categories of responses, are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So today I'm going to talk about fawn, and you can find the other videos talking about the other ones. Fawning is a relatively recently distinguished response, and it is a more complex response than the other ones. Fight and flight are just adrenaline. Freeze is pretty much the dorsal part of the vagus nerve kicking in and immobilizing us. But fawn is a much more complex behavior. Fawning is where you are pacifying people, you're giving them what you want, you're trying to keep people happy as a way to protect yourself, as a way to survive. So physiologically and neurologically, it's much more complex because you've got social interactions going on, you've got more parts of the brain involved, you've got more activity and more sophistication going on. But it is just as much a trauma response as the other ones. You're not keeping people happy because you love them and it makes you happy to see them happy. You're keeping people happy because you're terrified that if you don't keep them happy, something awful is going to happen. So the way that fawning shows up, the most obvious versions of it, we can see, we're familiar with, from our own experience and from popular culture and dramas and stuff. When somebody kidnaps you, you do whatever they tell you to do. You try to make them like you so they don't kill you. That's the large version of fawn. But a lot of us actually grow up fawning with our parents. A lot of us grow up with a significant level of fear of the reactions of our parents, one way or another. Either we're afraid that they're going to explode and be angry, or we're afraid that they're going to cry and be upset and be hurt, or be ashamed of us or disappointed in us. So a lot of us grow up focusing on managing the emotions of our parents, and that produces these fawning behaviors. So people will describe themselves as, oh, yes, I'm a people pleaser. I just have to keep everybody happy. I care more about others than I do about myself. Sometimes people even make it into a virtue. They might be a bit of a martyr about it, or they might just be very, I'm very selfless and giving and generous person. But what happens often is that people who are doing this fawning behavior don't really have a good sense of where their boundaries are, because it's a matter of survival to keep people happy. They will do things that really don't work for them as part of the process of keeping other people happy. And so they will burn themselves out or get overwhelmed or get exhausted because of the stuff they're doing in order to survive, in order to keep everybody else happy. And also, you can see codependent patterns where people who are fawning will stay in relationships with people who are really quite toxic or abusive or nasty, quite damaging. You can see it's affecting the person's physical and mental health, but they stay because the more scary the person is, the more they fawn, and the more they try to keep them happy, and the more they stay. So it's not always an adaptive response, fawning, but it's a very common response. And one of the biggest hazards of the fawning response, if you've learned it as a child, is if you spend your whole childhood focusing on what everybody else wants and keeping everybody else happy, you don't put any attention on yourself, getting to know yourself, knowing who you are, knowing what you want, knowing what keeps you happy. So even if you had a breath at some point as an adult and a moment to stop and think, hey, I have an afternoon off, what do I want to do? You have no idea. You have no idea who you are, what you like, what you want to do. So you end up spending the afternoon doing something for someone else anyway, because that's easier than trying to figure out what you might want to do when you've never had to think about that in your whole life. So if any of this is ringing a bell for you, for yourself, or for the people around, I recommend that you come into our trauma masterclass. and learn the basics of what trauma is, how it gets created, how it gets resolved, how you can support the people around you and yourself to work through and resolve and release your traumas and actually start to live a full and empowered, healthy life.